What if giving away the only meal you had could change your destiny forever? This is Camille Brown, 23 years old, a maid in Charleston barely surviving while raising her little brother. After 3 days of saving, she finally bought herself one small sandwich. But just as she lifts it to her lips, she notices an elderly couple at the corner booth, shivering, whispering desperately. "We've lost our wallet. I don't know how we'll pay," the woman says, clutching her purse with trembling hands. "Let's just leave, Margaret," the old man mutters, his voice breaking with shame. Camille looks down at her tray, the only meal she's had in days. Her stomach aches, but her heart speaks louder. She stands, walks to their table, and says, "Please, take mine." You need it more. What she doesn't know is that the couple isn't stranded at all. They're millionaires in disguise, testing the heart of a stranger. The man's piercing blue eyes aren't just grateful, they're calculating. The leather portfolio at the woman's side holds documents that will soon carry Camille's name. One act of kindness, two strangers with a hidden truth, and a reward beyond imagination. If this story touched you, share this video with a friend. Subscribe for more true stories that prove kindness can change lives, and may your day be filled with blessings. Charleston, South Carolina woke to a damp winter morning. Rain had washed the cobblestones before dawn, and the live oaks along Limehouse Street dripped steadily, the Spanish moss heavy with water. In a two-story duplex where yellow paint curled away like old wallpaper, Camille Brown stirred awake. She didn't need an alarm. Her body was trained by work and worry. Camille, 23, was tall and slim, with skin the warm brown of polished walnut and eyes that could look either soft or unflinching depending on the moment. Her hair, braided tight against her scalp, was tucked beneath a faded wrap. Years of early mornings and long shifts had left faint shadows under her eyes, but there was still a dignity in the way she carried herself. People who met her once remembered her quiet strength. People who knew her better understood the reservoir of determination she guarded behind polite smiles. She moved across creaking boards to check on her younger brother. Marcus Brown, 12, was curled on the couch beneath a patchwork blanket. His legs already dangled off the end, proof that boyhood was sprinting toward adolescence. Marcus had restless amber eyes and a quick smile he tried to hide under sarcasm. He was wiry, athletic, with a scar on his shin from a fence that hadn't cooperated. Camille brushed the blanket over his ankles, listening to his even breathing. The house was a study in survival. Windows sealed with duct tape, a porch that sagged, and a heater that clicked awake when it felt like it. On the kitchen table lay bills in neat stacks, electric, water, rent beside an envelope with a few worn bills marked St. Augustine Prep application fee. Camille whispered the phrase she told herself each morning, "We'll find a way." She brewed weak coffee, then woke Marcus. "Up, astronaut," she teased. He cracked one eye. "Astronauts get breakfast." She handed him the last 2 slices of bread with a thin smear of peanut butter. "Rocket fuel." "You already ate?" "Coffee's enough." He gave her a look that said he didn't believe it, but he ate anyway. 12 was old enough to see through sacrifice, young enough to resent it. By 7, they were outside under a pearl gray sky. At the bus stop, Marcus shifted his backpack while Camille reviewed the day. Homework first, then 30 minutes of ball if the fractions page is done. "Don't forget Mr. Lewis has that calculator." "What if he sold it?" Marcus muttered. "Guess I'll turn to a life of crime." She nudged him. "Then I'll turn to a life of grounding." He smirked but quieted when she added softly, "I see you at St. Augustine." Walking a different floor, he didn't answer. Some hopes were too heavy for words. Her first job was at Mrs. Davison's home in Harleston Village. Mrs. Davison, mid-60s, wore pressed linen pants and pearls even in the morning. She was graceful, pale, with hands that moved like a pianist's. Camille respected her calm, exact, but from a world that never ran late because others carried the clock for her. "Good morning, Camille," she said, leading her to the kitchen. "We've a luncheon. Make the oven shine." "Yes, ma'am." Camille scrubbed and polished, moving with practiced rhythm. Halfway through, Mrs. Davison said casually, "Your brother, he's bright, yes?" "I sit on St. Augustine's board. They do wonders with boys who need structure." Camille's shoulders tensed. "He's bright," she said evenly, "and he has structure." Mrs. Davison raised her palms, a gesture of peace. "If you ever need a recommendation—" Camille thanked her, knowing bridges mattered even if they were uneven. Next came Mr. and Mrs. Legrand on Broad Street, a white-haired couple in their 70s. He, tall but stooped, carried a cane and a library of legal volumes. She, round-cheeked, wore sensible shoes and kept porcelain arranged like soldiers. They were affectionate in a brisk, old Charleston way. "Miss Brown," he said, tapping a bow tie straight, "dust those books like you're cross-examining them. I'll make them confess." They chuckled, and she stripped beds, polished frames, and listened to their small debates about whether to host Thanksgiving this year. Wealth here was quiet, but its weight pressed on her as she left with a polite farewell. The third house belonged to Ms. Pearl, a black woman in her 50s who had run catering until her knees failed. Compact and strong, she wore purple glasses and laughed with her whole body. Her cat, Royalty, shed fur like a blizzard. "Camille girl," she exclaimed, hugging her. "You look transparent. Take stew." "It's fine, Miss Pearl." "Don't argue." She pressed a Tupperware of beans and rice into Camille's bag. "Food isn't charity. It's fuel, and that boy of yours, hungry can sound like angry." Remember that Camille swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Her last stop was an Airbnb on Queen Street. The property manager, Neil Hutch, was 30, freckled, with sandy hair and nervous energy. He wore a branded vest and spoke like every sentence was late. "Camille, lifesaver, bachelorette crew at 4, disaster inside." She surveyed champagne stains and confetti, then got to work. By 3:40, the place gleamed again. Neil tapped thank yous into his phone that would become payment weeks later. Outside, gulls circled above a sky turning pale silver. Camille checked her phone. A text from Marcus. "Practice ran late. Home after 5. Another from the power company. Final notice." She tightened her grip on Miss Pearl's container. Evening brought her back to the duplex. She reheated the beans and rice, setting a plate for Marcus and pouring him water with a wedge of lemon taken discreetly from a client's tree. He ate quickly, hiding his gratitude. "Coach says I might run point if grades hold," he said between bites. "They'll hold." But when she cleared the table, he caught her swaying slightly, her stomach hollow. "You didn't eat," he accused. "Had coffee and a banana." "That's not dinner." "This is dumb, Cammy. All the scraping, the saving. A different school won't change everything." His voice cracked with frustration. She drew him close, his forehead pressing into her shoulder. "I know it feels dumb, but St. Augustine isn't a ceiling. It's a door." He said nothing, but his silence was heavy. Later, after he slept, Camille spread the bills again under the dim kitchen light. She opened the St. Augustine application and wrote carefully. Marcus Brown. Guardian, Camille Brown. Occupation, housekeeping. She stopped at the line for application fee, $45. Her stomach clenched from both hunger and the weight of numbers that never stretched. She whispered the same promise she had made at dawn. "We'll find it." Then she set the pen down, turned off the light to save the bill a little more, and lay awake listening to the house breathe around her. Outside, Charleston streets glistened from the day's rain, and the river air carried both salt and hope. By evening, the weather had turned feral. Charleston's sky, a bruised slate gray, pressed low against the rooftops, and the rain that had whispered through the morning now arrived like a hammer. Water drummed against corrugated awnings, carved rivers down gutters, and pooled in the cobblestones until headlights fractured into 100 trembling stars. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and wet wood, and the wind snapped at the Spanish moss like it wanted to strip the trees bare. Camille Brown hunched beneath her thrifted coat, its zipper stubborn halfway up, clutching a thin umbrella already bending under the storm. She had just finished her 4th house of the day, and exhaustion pressed on her shoulders as much as the rain. For 3 days, she had skipped extras, no sodas, no snacks, no bus rides when her legs could carry her, saving pennies and singles in the envelope clipped inside her bag. Tonight was meant to be her reward. One simple sandwich at Murphy's Deli, nothing fancy, just bread and meat she hadn't bought in weeks. Her sneakers squelched as she crossed the slick parking lot, neon signs shimmering in puddles like stained glass. Inside, the diner's fluorescent lights buzzed, and the smell of fried onions and hot coffee wrapped around her like a quilt. She shook the rain from her coat and took a hesitant breath. Behind the counter, Sandy McKay, the evening waitress, glanced up. Sandy was in her 40s, with curly auburn hair streaked at the temples, freckles fading into pale cheeks, and an easy smile that carried weariness behind it. Her frame was sturdy, her hands quick with coffee pots, and her voice had a southern lilt, softened by years of repeating pleasantries to strangers. Life had made her practical, but not unkind. Her first husband had died in a car crash when she was 21, and she had raised 2 kids mostly alone. That history had carved something steady in her, a way of looking at people like she'd already measured their pain. "You look drowned, honey," Sandy said, sliding a napkin across the counter. "Feels about right," Camille answered, offering the smallest smile. She ordered the sandwich she had dreamed about, a turkey melt with fries, and clutched the order slip like it was a ticket to somewhere better. She sat near the counter, steam rising from the coffee machine, eyes closing for a moment in tired gratitude. But her gaze was drawn inevitably to the corner booth. There, beneath the harsh overhead lights, sat an elderly couple. The man, tall but shrunken with age, wore a suit that must once have been sharp, but now clung to him like wet paper. His hair was silver, combed back but soaked through, his posture ramrod straight as though habit refused to yield to weather. His pale blue eyes scanned the room with the authority of someone used to being obeyed, though tonight they flickered with something closer to worry. Beside him, the woman's silver hair dripped onto her designer coat. She was elegant even in disarray, her face lined but graceful, with hands that trembled as they clutched a worn leather portfolio. Her pearl earrings caught the light, incongruous with the cheap ceramic mug of coffee she nursed. Camille noticed their movements, the woman opening her purse again and again, shaking her head, the man patting every pocket with growing desperation. Their conversation was hushed, but fragments carried. Wallet, don't understand. Must have dropped it. Shame wrapped around them, heavier than the rain outside. Sandy approached, her expression tight. "Folks, I hate to press, but the check..." The woman's face crumbled. We can't seem to find our wallet." "I'm so sorry. This has never..." The man interrupted, his voice still steady despite the circumstance. "Perhaps I can leave collateral." "My watch." He pulled out an antique gold pocket watch, its chain gleaming even under the diner's tired lights. "I'm afraid it's against policy," Sandy said gently. "Mike runs a strict house." Camille's order arrived then, the sandwich and fries still steaming. She reached for the tray, hunger gnawing, but her eyes caught the couple's once more. They had begun to rise, the man's hand steadying his wife, their dignity fraying as they prepared to step back into the storm with nothing. Camille's stomach twisted. This was her meal, the one she had saved 3 days for. She thought of Marcus at home, the envelope with not enough money, the empty ache in her belly. But she also saw the woman's trembling hands and the man's straight shoulders bent under humiliation. She stood before she could talk herself out of it. "Wait!" Her voice carried across the diner. The couple paused at the door. "Please, sit back down." They looked at her, startled. She lifted her tray, walked to their booth, and slid it gently across the table. "This one's on me tonight." The woman blinked rapidly, eyes shining. "Oh, sweetheart, no." "That's yours. Please," Camille said, forcing a smile. "My grandmother always said kindness is the only thing that multiplies when you give it away." The man studied her face with those piercing blue eyes, something flickering behind them. Finally, he nodded once. "Thank you." Sandy returned with fresh coffee, catching Camille's eye with a look that mixed astonishment and respect. You sure about this, honey? Camille nodded. They need it more than I do. She slid into the booth beside them, ignoring the hollow growl in her stomach. Back on Limehouse Street, the storm rattled the thin windows of their duplex. Marcus paced the small living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes. His homework lay untouched on the table, math problems waiting in neat rows. He was old enough to recognize how late it had grown, young enough to let worry turn quickly into fear. He thought about the bills spread across the table that morning, the way his sister's shoulders hunched when she counted coins. He thought of how often she skipped meals, insisting she wasn't hungry. A knot tightened in his chest. What if he dropped school and found work? He'd seen older boys hustle downtown, carrying boxes at the fish market or washing cars for tourists. Maybe he could do the same. At least then Camille wouldn't have to shoulder everything. He imagined walking away from homework, trading textbooks for wages. It felt heavy, but it felt possible. He sat, chin in his hands, listening to the storm hammer the roof, wondering what kind of future his sister was starving herself to buy. In Murphy's Deli, the elderly woman, she introduced herself as Margaret, took small, trembling bites of the sandwich. Her husband, Harold, ate slower, his pale eyes fixed on Camille as if memorizing her face. They asked her name, and she told them simply, Camille Brown. She didn't mention the envelope at home, the dream of St. Augustine Prep, or the hunger that coiled tighter with every fry she surrendered. Margaret whispered, We haven't eaten since breakfast. Our car broke down, and then this cars break down, Camille said gently. Happens to everyone. Harold leaned forward. And yet, you gave us your only meal. Camille shrugged, embarrassed. It's just food. You needed it more. But as she said it, her stomach knotted, and she wondered if kindness was worth the ache. She thought of Marcus, waiting. She thought of the rain still lashing the diner windows, and she hoped, desperately, that she hadn't made a mistake. The storm eased to a steady drizzle by the time Camille rose to leave. She wished them well, pulled her coat close, and stepped back into the wet night, her hunger a companion she tried not to name. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Camille made her way back down Limehouse Street. The storm that had hammered Charleston all evening had left the pavement slick and shining, the air cool and damp enough to seep through her thrifted coat. Street lamps threw halos across puddles, and the occasional car sent waves of water sloshing against the curb. She walked quickly, her body heavy with fatigue and her stomach hollow from the meal she had given away. The hunger gnawed at her, but she kept replaying the image of the elderly woman's trembling hands and the quiet dignity in the man's pale blue eyes. Somehow, despite her aching body, her chest felt lighter. She pushed open the duplex door, the hinges groaning. Warmth from the little space heater pooled weakly in the living room, where Marcus sat hunched at the table. His math homework lay sprawled across the surface, numbers abandoned halfway through. His sneakers were still on, mud from the yard drying into flakes beneath the chair. He lifted his head quickly when he heard her, his expression a mixture of relief and simmering anger. "You're late," he muttered, though his tone betrayed more worry than accusation. "I know," Camille said softly, slipping off her wet coat and hanging it on the wobbling rack. She shook droplets from her braids, forcing a smile. The buses were running slow in the storm. She didn't mention the diner or the meal she no longer had. Marcus stared at her, his jaw tight. He was 12, but the sharpness in his gaze belonged to someone much older. "You didn't eat again, did you?" She hesitated. "I'm fine. Ms. Pearl gave me beans and rice earlier, remember?" It was technically true, but the container still sat unopened in the fridge, her insurance for tomorrow. Marcus pushed back from the table, his chair legs scraping across the uneven floor. "Cammy, this is ridiculous. You work yourself half to death and then you give away what little you get. For what? We're still broke. The bills are still there. Nothing changes." His voice cracked, higher than he wanted it to be, but his frustration filled the small room. "Marcus," she began, reaching toward him. "No!" He shook her off, pacing. "You think starving yourself and cleaning rich people's houses is going to make them suddenly care? It won't. You think some fancy school is going to fix our lives? It won't. We'll always be stuck here no matter how many meals you skip." His words cut deeper than he realized. Camille's face tightened, her eyes stinging. She looked at him, the boy she had raised since he was 4 when their mother died in a car accident, leaving her to play both sister and mother. She saw his fists clenched, his shoulders shaking with anger, but beneath it all was fear. Fear that she was sacrificing everything and it would amount to nothing. "Marcus," she said quietly, steadying her voice. "I know it feels hopeless sometimes, but I can't let us stop trying. If we stop, then we've already lost." He turned away, his breathing sharp, his hands tugging at the hem of his hoodie. "You don't get it. I could quit school now. I could work at the docks or sweep floors at the car wash. At least I'd be helping instead of sitting here pretending homework matters." She stepped in front of him, catching his eyes with hers. "No, you don't quit. Not for me, not for bills. Your future is the one thing I'm not willing to trade." For a long moment they stared at each other, the storm outside punctuating the silence with soft drips from the eaves. Marcus's defiance wavered. Beneath his anger was a boy who wanted permission to believe, even if believing hurt. He jerked his head away, muttering, "I just don't want you to keep breaking yourself for nothing." Her throat tightened, but she forced a smile. "It's not for nothing. It's for you. For us." Later that night, after Marcus had retreated to the couch and drifted into restless sleep, Camille sat alone at the kitchen table. The bills stared back at her in their neat piles, the application for St. Augustine Prep still unfinished. She traced Marcus's name with her finger, her eyes blurring. For the first time in weeks, she let the tears come silently. Her chest shook with doubt whether kindness mattered, whether any of her sacrifices would change the gravity of poverty that seemed to pull them down no matter how hard she fought. She pressed her face into her hands and whispered into the dark kitchen, "Am I just being foolish?" The only answer was the creak of the old house settling, the sigh of the night easing after the storm. In the small bedroom, Marcus stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent, his hand curled around the edge of the blanket. Camille wiped her cheeks, stood, and pulled the Afghan higher over his shoulder. She kissed his hair lightly and whispered, "We'll find a way, Marcus. Even if I don't know how yet." The house quieted, the rain finally stopping, leaving Charleston wrapped in the thick silence of a city waiting for dawn. Camille lay awake long after, staring at the ceiling, her body aching, her heart caught between pride and despair. Morning in Charleston came reluctantly, the sky still heavy with the damp residue of the night's storm. The streets glistened, cobblestones holding pockets of water that mirrored the pale gray of dawn. Seagulls cried faintly over the harbor, and a light wind carried the sharp tang of salt into the east side neighborhood. Inside the duplex, Camille Brown stood at the narrow kitchen counter, tucking a packet of crackers into Marcus's backpack and checking the clock for the 3rd time. Her eyes were red-rimmed from little sleep, her body sluggish from hunger, but she moved with the careful efficiency she had practiced since her teenage years. She poured weak coffee into a chipped mug, took a quick sip, and set it aside. The bills on the table still waited, demanding, and the half-completed St. Augustine application peeked out accusingly from beneath them. Marcus shuffled out of the living room in wrinkled clothes, his hair sticking up from sleep. He avoided her gaze, still sore from their argument the night before, but he didn't push. His eyes lingered on her face, noting the fatigue she tried to disguise with a faint smile. Before either of them could speak, 3 firm knocks rattled the front door. Camille stiffened. Visitors were rare here, especially in the early morning. Marcus glanced at her, curiosity sharpening his features. She wiped her hands on her jeans and crossed the small room, heart quickening. When she opened the door, the world outside seemed to tilt. Standing on the porch were the same elderly couple she had fed the night before. But gone were the damp coats, the trembling hands, the air of humiliation. In their place stood a pair of figures so polished they seemed pulled from a magazine, The man's silver hair was combed to perfection, his tall frame wrapped in a tailored charcoal suit that draped across his shoulders like it had been cut for a king. His pale blue eyes, so desperate last night, now radiated calm authority. At his side, the woman's silver hair was swept into a chignon, her designer coat replaced by a cream-colored suit accented with a silk scarf. Her pearl earrings caught the light of the new day. Behind them, a sleek black sedan idled at the curb, and a uniformed driver stood nearby. The transformation was so absolute that for a moment, Camille wondered if she had imagined the diner, the rain, the coffee cups. The man spoke first, his voice deep and deliberate. "Miss Brown, good morning. I am Richard Whitmore." He extended a hand, firm and confident. "This is my wife, Margaret." "We owe you a conversation," Marcus, who had crept up behind his sister, blinked in astonishment. His jaw nearly dropped, and his fingers clutched the strap of his backpack like it was the only steady thing in the room. Camille hesitated, her stomach twisting. I don't understand. Last night " "Last night was a test," Richard said, his tone softened by sincerity. "We wanted to see how you would respond when faced with a choice. You could have turned away. You didn't." Margaret stepped forward, her eyes warm but piercing. "You gave us the only meal you had, expecting nothing in return. That is rare, Miss Brown. Rarer than you know." The words fell into the narrow hallway of the duplex, mixing with the smell of damp wood and coffee. Camille gripped the door frame, unsure what to say. She thought of her tears from the night before, the gnawing hunger, Marcus's anger. Richard gestured toward the car. "May we come in for a moment? Or, if you'd prefer, we can speak on the porch." Camille stepped aside, embarrassed at the peeling paint and the sagging floorboards, but too stunned to refuse. The couple entered, bringing with them the faint scent of expensive cologne and leather seats. The Whitmores settled into the small living room, their elegance almost absurd against the sagging couch and the humming space heater. Marcus stood stiffly in the doorway, still watching in disbelief. Richard's gaze swept the room, not with judgment, but with a quiet recognition. He leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "Camille, I am the founder of the Whitmore Foundation. We invest in community development, education, and leadership. For the past week, we have been in Charleston assessing candidates for a new initiative. Last night, we completed our evaluation." Camille's brows knit. "Evaluation?" Margaret smiled faintly, opening the same leather portfolio Camille had glimpsed in the diner. Inside were neatly organized documents, embossed with a gold emblem. "We've been gathering information about you. Your teachers, your employers, your neighbors, they all spoke of your work ethic, your kindness, your strength." Marcus finally found his voice, incredulous. "You mean, you spied on her?" Margaret turned her gaze to him, kind but unflinching. "We observed. Because real character shows itself when no one is watching, and last night your sister proved what we already suspected." Richard reached into his jacket and produced a card heavy with embossed lettering. He placed it on the coffee table beside the stack of bills. "Camille, we believe you are exactly the kind of leader we are searching for. Someone who knows hardship, but chooses compassion. Someone we can trust to help shape the future of this community." Camille stared at the card, then at them. Her throat felt dry. I don't know what to say." Marcus muttered, still stunned. "Say thank you?" Margaret's laugh was soft, genuine. "There will be time for gratitude later. For now, understand this. You are not alone anymore. Last night was not the end of your story. It was the beginning." The room seemed to shrink around Camille. Her heart pounded, her mind scrambling to catch up. All she could think was how the world had shifted in a single knock, turning strangers into benefactors, hunger into possibility. And standing beside her, Marcus looked at her with a mixture of pride and disbelief, as if realizing for the first time that his sister's stubborn kindness might actually change their lives. The air inside the little duplex felt too thin, as though the room itself struggled to contain the weight of what had just been said. Camille sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, her knees pressed together, her hands gripping each other so tightly her knuckles whitened. Across from her, Richard and Margaret Whitmore sat with unshakable composure, their elegance somehow softening against the worn furniture. Marcus hovered near the doorframe, backpack still slung over one shoulder, his wide amber eyes darting between his sister and the strangers who claimed they were not strangers at all. Richard leaned forward, folding his long fingers together. His voice was steady, deliberate. "Camille, let me be plain. My foundation is launching a new initiative in Charleston. We're building a scholarship program and a community project here. But we've learned through hard experience that money alone cannot create lasting change. It requires a leader with roots in the community, someone who knows the struggles firsthand, someone people can trust." Camille blinked, her pulse hammering in her ears. "And you think that's me?" "Yes," Margaret answered before her husband could. Her tone was firm, yet not unkind. "Your life demonstrates what we look for: responsibility, resilience, generosity. People already speak of you with respect. You've been leading quietly without a title. We want to give you one." Camille's throat tightened. It sounded absurd. Her, a maid who skipped meals and patched her sneakers with glue, leading a project tied to millionaires? She tried to laugh, but the sound cracked halfway out. "With all due respect, ma'am, people like me don't get offers like this. We get passed over. Or tricked." Richard did not flinch. Instead, he reached into the leather folio Margaret carried. He drew out a sheaf of papers bound neatly with a brass clip and set them on the coffee table. "I expected skepticism. Here is the contract. Review it carefully. Nothing is hidden." Camille stared at the thick packet, too afraid to touch it. The bold header read, "Whitmore Foundation, Charleston Community Fellowship Proposal." Beneath it were lines of legal text, an embossed seal pressed deep into the page. Margaret opened another folder and withdrew two separate documents. She placed one in front of Marcus, who had edged closer despite himself. "For your brother, a full scholarship. Tuition, books, uniforms, fees, everything covered at St. Augustine Preparatory Academy. He will not have to worry about being turned away for lack of funds." Marcus gasped audibly, his fingers brushing the page. His eyes flew to his sister, pleading and astonished all at once. The second document Margaret handed directly to Camille. "And for you, Miss Brown, the position of Community Program Coordinator, a salaried role within our initiative. You would train with our team, assist in the establishment of the scholarship program, and, in time, help oversee our development center here." Camille's lips parted, but no words emerged. Her world tilted. She thought of late nights folding laundry until her back ached, of counting coins by lamplight, of whispering promises to Marcus she barely believed herself. Here, on the table, lay a chance to rewrite everything. And yet, her chest tightened with suspicion. Why me? You could choose someone with a degree, a person with experience. I'm just... "The person we need," Richard interrupted, his pale blue eyes locking onto hers. "Degrees can be earned. Experience can be taught. Character, however, that cannot be faked. You proved yours last night when you handed us your only meal. That choice told us more about you than any resume ever could." The silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of the old space heater. From the kitchen, a voice joined the tension. Mrs. Duval, their elderly neighbor. She had shuffled in unannounced through the back door, clutching her floral housecoat at her chest. She often came by for morning chatter, unaware of timing. Her hair, wispy white and tightly combed, framed a face etched with years of both hardship and humor. "Mercy me," she said, adjusting her glasses to peer at the finely dressed visitors. "Did I walk into the governor's mansion by mistake?" Camille half rose, flustered. "Mrs. Duval, this isn't—" Richard stood and bowed his head politely. "Not at all, ma'am. We were just speaking with Camille about an opportunity." Mrs. Duval tilted her head, eyes narrowing with suspicion earned from a lifetime of promises broken by smooth talkers. "Opportunity, huh? Folks like us hear that word usually means someone's about to sell us something we can't afford. Margaret smiled gently, unfazed. Sometimes it means a door opening. Mrs. Duval sniffed and settled into the nearest chair, uninvited but unashamed. Well, if it's about my Camille, you'd better make it good. That girl carries this whole street on her back. Camille flushed, embarrassed by the praise, but Richard only nodded. That is exactly why we're here. The tension in the room thickened. Camille's hands shook as she picked up the scholarship paper, scanning the bold type. 4-year full scholarship, renewable annually, contingent only on academic performance and conduct. It seemed too good to be true. Her eyes flicked to the second page. Community Program Coordinator, salary, $42,000 annually, health benefits included. Her breath caught. She had never seen such a number tied to her own name. Marcus whispered almost reverently, "Cammy, this is real." But Camille's heart pounded with fear as much as hope. What if it's not? What if it's just another way to make fools of us? I can't afford to gamble with Marcus's future. Richard leaned back, understanding in his gaze. The choice is yours. We won't pressure you, but understand, Miss Brown, this is not charity. This is partnership. We don't need to exploit you. We need you. Without local leadership, our project cannot succeed, and we believe you are that leader. Mrs. Duval harumphed softly, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of approval. If it's true, child, you'd be foolish to turn it down. But be careful. Fine print bites. Camille pressed her palms to her knees, trembling. She had dreamed of opportunity, but not like this. Not so sudden, so enormous. Her entire body screamed for caution. Yet across the room, Marcus looked at her with hope brighter than she had ever seen in his eyes. The moment swelled, sharp and breathless. She stood, the papers clutched in her hands. Her voice shook, but her words carried the weight of the decision pressing on her soul. I need time. This is too much to take in all at once. Richard inclined his head, respectful. Of course. Take all the time you need, but remember, Miss Brown, some doors close if left too long unopened. The Whitmores rose, their movements graceful. They left a leather folder on the table, embossed with the foundation's seal, then made their way to the waiting sedan. The driver, a tall black man in his 40s with a clean-shaven head and an air of quiet professionalism, opened the door. His name tag read, James Carter. His posture spoke of military service. Shoulders square, gaze steady, words economical. He offered Camille a polite nod before following his employers into the car. The sedan pulled away, its tires hissing against wet pavement, leaving silence in its wake. Inside, Camille stood frozen, heart thundering. Marcus clutched her arm. Cammy, say yes, please. This is everything we've been waiting for. Her lips parted, her stomach churning with equal parts terror and longing. For the first time in years, she was faced not with survival, but with choice. And choice, she realized, was far heavier than hunger. The year that followed moved like a tide, pulling Camille and Marcus into a world they had never imagined, but one they learned to navigate with steady steps. Trusting the Whitmores had not been easy, but Camille's choice that morning, clutching the papers with trembling hands and whispering a cautious yes, had shifted the course of both their lives. By spring, Marcus stood in a crisp navy blazer with the St. Augustine crest stitched proudly on the pocket. His amber eyes gleamed with the kind of excitement Camille had longed to see since he was a boy. He carried his books in a backpack that no longer sagged at the seams, and he walked hallways lined with banners celebrating academic excellence. The scholarship had given him more than access, it gave him belonging. Teachers spoke of his quick wit and persistence. Classmates invited him into study groups, and the boy who once muttered about quitting school now dreamed of engineering and basketball championships. Camille herself entered a world equally foreign. As a community program coordinator for the Whitmore Foundation, she worked under the mentorship of Elaine Porter, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper curls cropped close to her head and glasses that perched halfway down her nose. Elaine, tall and angular, had a voice that could cut through a noisy room without raising volume. She had once been a civil rights lawyer before a family tragedy, the loss of her only son to leukemia, pushed her into nonprofit work. That grief had left her with a sharp edge, but also with fierce compassion. Elaine demanded excellence, but she offered guidance freely, her sternness always laced with the desire to see others succeed. Camille learned quickly under her wing, drafting proposals, visiting schools, and listening to stories of families much like her own. The paycheck felt unreal at first. When the first deposit landed in her account, Camille cried alone in her room before using it to fix the leaking roof, repaint the peeling walls, and replace the failing heater. For the first time since she could remember, the house felt like a home that breathed with hope instead of just endurance. Their neighbor, Mrs. Duvall, also felt the ripple of change. The foundation funded a health initiative that sent a nurse once a week to elderly residents in the district. Nurse Clara Jimenez, a petite woman in her 30s with warm brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a bun, and a constant air of calm competence, began visiting Mrs. Duvall regularly. Clara had a gentle but no-nonsense manner shaped by years in community clinics. Her parents had immigrated from Honduras, and she carried their work ethic proudly. With Clara's help, Mrs. Duvall's diabetes came under control, her arthritis managed with proper medication, and her memory lapses treated with new patients. She often told Camille, "Child, your kindness spilled over my doorstep and brought me blessings I didn't even pray for." At work, Camille met dozens of families through the Foundation's scholarship outreach. One afternoon, she encountered the Harris family, a single mother named Denise, thin and weary, with 3 children tugging at her hands. Denise had tired eyes that once sparkled when she sang in her church choir, but now dulled from juggling 2 jobs at the grocery store and laundromat. Her eldest, Jamal, wore shoes 2 sizes too small, while the younger twins clung to their mother's coat. Camille saw herself in them. She fought hard to secure Jamal a scholarship spot, and when the acceptance letter arrived, Denise hugged Camille until both women wept. As the months rolled into autumn, Camille's confidence grew. Her voice no longer faltered in meetings. She learned to read budgets, to argue for resources, and to stand in front of rooms full of donors and tell stories that cracked open wallets and hearts alike. Elaine once pulled her aside and said, "You've found the rhythm. Don't lose it. But remember, leadership isn't about standing tallest. It's about holding the ladder steady for the next climber." Winter brought both challenges and triumphs. Marcus struggled with advanced coursework, nearly failing a math exam, but Camille spent evenings tutoring him, even when exhaustion weighed her down. Their bond deepened as he began to see her not just as his sister, but as a mentor. Meanwhile, the Foundation broke ground on a community center in Charleston, the very one Richard had first described. Camille stood at the site one chilly morning, hard hat on, mud clinging to her boots, and thought of the night in Murphy's Deli when she had handed over her only meal. The memory burned bright, a reminder that the smallest choices could birth the grandest consequences. By the time spring returned, the transformation was undeniable. The house on Limehouse Street had fresh paint and new steps. Marcus flourished at St. Augustine, joining the debate team and finding pride in his achievements. Mrs. Duvall's health stabilized, and she now baked small pies for neighborhood children, her laughter returning with vigor. Camille herself received her first commendation from the Foundation for her dedication and vision. Yet the truest test came quietly, almost unnoticed. One rainy evening, Camille ducked into Murphy's Deli, now renovated with brighter lights and fresh booths. She hadn't been back since that night with the Whitmores. The smell of fried onions and coffee brought back memories so vivid her throat tightened. As she scanned the room, her eyes landed on a young Hispanic couple sitting nervously in the corner booth. Their clothes were travel-worn. Their 2 small children fidgeted beside them, and on the table sat only 2 empty coffee cups. The husband's hands shook as he counted coins, his face pale with worry. The wife, slender, with dark hair clinging to her damp cheeks, tried to hush the children's complaints of hunger. Camille knew the scene instantly. pride bruised, dignity unraveling, desperation hidden behind polite smiles. It was the mirror of her own story, replayed in different faces. The waitress on duty, a younger woman with short blonde hair and a tired smile, Kylie, 22, a college dropout working double shifts to cover tuition debts, approached their table uncertainly, check in hand. Camille recognized the same hesitation she had once seen in Sandy. Before the moment stretched too far, Camille stood. She crossed the diner, her heels clicking softly against the tile. She placed a hand gently on the table, catching the couple's startled eyes, and smiled. "Let me take care of this," she said simply. The wife blinked, tears welling instantly. The husband stammered, "No, we couldn't. Please," Camille interrupted, her voice warm, steady, filled with the conviction of someone who knew what such a gesture could mean. "I insist. My grandmother used to tell me that kindness multiplies when it's shared. She was right." The family's shoulders sagged with relief. Kylie glanced at Camille, gratitude in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." As the children tucked eagerly into the food that soon arrived, Camille leaned back in the booth across from them. She remembered the stormy night when she had been the one with an empty belly, the one who chose compassion over comfort. Her heart swelled with quiet certainty. It had never been wasted. Outside, the rain eased and Charleston's streets glowed under the neon hum of shop signs. Camille rose, paid the bill without ceremony, and stepped into the damp evening air. She felt the same calm she had felt that first night, but now it came with the strength of knowing that kindness could ripple far beyond what eyes could see. Sometimes the smallest choices carry the greatest weight. Camille gave away a simple meal, and that single act opened the door to a new life. In our daily lives, we may not see millionaires knocking on our doors, but kindness has a way of multiplying in places we never expect. Every time we choose compassion over indifference, we plant seeds of change in someone's heart. If this story touched you, share it with a friend who might need encouragement today. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. And if you believe kindness can transform the world, write amen in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of the good still alive in this world. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, hope, and the strength to keep choosing kindness.